Our students are the future. How we advance innovation and impact and approach equity in their classrooms will determine how we thrive as a world community. The status quo just won't cut it. That's why we're here to break the grade. Hello, breakers and difference makers. I'm Josh Chernikoff, host of How I Broke That. I'm a two-time entrepreneur in the education space, and I've successfully exited both of those companies. I've experienced my fair share of breaks in my life, and I'm here to bring my signature approach to my new show, Breaking the Grade. I'm embarking on this special journey alongside my good friend and mentor, John Gamba, Director of Innovative Programs and Entrepreneur in Residence at Penn GSE. In our podcast, you'll hear from emerging business owners in the education space who are working to transform education as we know it. Tune in as we hear about industry trends, unique principles and practices, and the attempts that have and haven't worked for our grade-breaking guests. So fellow entrepreneurs and educators, what do you think? Are you ready to take a hammer to the education space and break the grade? Welcome to a very special edition of Breaking the Grade, and I know what you're thinking. Josh says every edition of Breaking the Grade is special, but this one really is. Because we are re-airing our first guest from April of 2022. The great Washingtonian, the great reformer in education, the president of Stride, Kevin Chavous. Kevin joined the show, and John Gamba and I were gaga for Kevin Chavous. You'll hear it in the interview. What Kevin talks about is that sometimes your buyers in the education space do not buy because you have proof. They do not buy because you have product wins. Sometimes they actually buy because of how you recover from your setbacks, because that builds trust. And Kevin believes trust is so important. Again, Kevin was one of the very first guests we had on Breaking the Grade, and I was so honored because I'm a Washingtonian and Kevin did a lot of great work here in Washington, D.C. John Gamba was so honored to have Kevin because of Kevin's work in education reform, and John has been a part of that for many years. You'll hear both of us, as I said, go gaga over Kevin Chavous. Now, if you're struggling to turn interest into action, this conversation might be your blueprint to turn those scars into trust. And now you get to learn from the great Kevin Chavous. Enjoy this interview. Welcome to Breaking the Grade. Kevin and my co-host John, welcome to our show.
Oh, it's so great to be on, Josh. John, I'm glad you got the email. We're dressed like my brother. And Josh, I'm one of your biggest fans. So thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that. John, how you doing? How's your vest?
Doing great. I'm glad that I did get the memo, and it's great to see you, Kevin.
Yeah, cool. Kevin, as we've talked about before, I'm 42 now, so I got a chance to watch your journey a little bit growing up in Washington, D.C. But I think it would be important for our audience, for them to understand where your journey has taken you and where you are now. We might interject with some questions because John and I are kind of giddy about having you here. But if you can just tell us where it started and take us along that journey.
Well, the first thing I say is stop. Don't just stop. But look, my journey is pretty simple. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I was blessed because I was one of those kids who felt he could make a difference and change the world. So I was drawn to come to DC to go to law school. I went to Howard Law. And I believed in public service. I mean, I feel kind of sad for a lot of young people today who see the way politics is administered in this country now. This sort of I got you either or, you're with me or against me. When I was younger, there was an aspirational feeling that you could make a difference by going into public service and into politics. I mean, you felt like you could change the world. And so when I got to DC and ended up graduating and practicing law, and then I got involved in local politics and I was on the city council, I didn't know how I could make a difference. I just had that burning desire to make a difference. It almost sounds corny, but it's actually true. I was always that kid. And I got into education when I was on the city council, and I was an athlete, played basketball, small college All-American in Indiana. And I used to have these celebrity basketball games with radio stations, for philanthropy. And I got a call. This is what drove me to education. I got a call from the warden at our local prison who said, Councilman, you have these celebrity games. We've seen you on TV, heard you on the radio. And we've got a basketball team here at the jail, but no one wants to play them. So I brought my guys in there, a couple ex-basketball players, a couple ex-pros, and we played against the inmates.
Drop some names.
Yeah, I mean, well,
big basketball guys. So drop some names here.
Yeah, well, there were guys like the guy who played for Notre Dame, Duck Williams, and he eventually played pro for a couple of years. And let me see who else. But I think did Duck go with me to the prison? I can't remember. We had, in fact, on some of our celebrity games, we had guys like Brian McKnight, Little Bow Wow, Tank. The rapper. We played against the Police and Donnie Simpson on the radio and Tony Perkins and those guys.
Nice.
And I always tell the Police we never beat the Police. In fact, they used to pull me over sometimes, lights and siren, because they were mad because I beat them. But when we went to the prison and I spent time with these young guys, and I realized that some of them were in because the drugs, it wasn't violent crimes, but because of accident of birth, they were in a situation where their environment led them to crime. And I said, I had this image, if you were in prison, you were a bad person. I mean, it was sort of naive. But I realized that through accident of birth or stumbles along the way or environment or not having the right family support, not having the right school support, these guys fell into crime. And I spoke to the warden and I asked him, I said, what kind of educational programs do you have for these young men? Because I think that some of them could turn their lives around. And he said, Councilman, 90% of these young men can't read. Over 80% of them dropped out of high school. It'd be a waste of the taxpayers' money to even try to educate them. That was what the warden said to me. And I tell you, Josh and John, I can remember that day so starkly. It literally changed my trajectory because I said, this doesn't feel right to me. And when I was elected, I didn't think about getting an education, but I said, we've got to do something. So I became a student of education. I started visiting our schools in Southeast and Northeast DC, and some were doing well, but many of them, they just, they had written off the kids. And I saw these young kids who were, 6, 7 years old, and teachers were saying, well, we're doing the best for these ghetto kids, but we don't think they're going to amount to much. I mean, I had a teacher say that to me. So that's how I got involved in education. At the same time, fortuitously, we were considering the charter school legislation. We were considering reform in DC public schools. And I just jumped into that whole world feet first. And I felt like, and I tell my sons this, I feel like knowledge and expertise is power. So my view was that even though I wasn't a teacher and didn't know anything about the education industry, I was going to absorb it and know it as well or better than anyone. And about teaching modalities, about administration, about all the aspects of curriculum design, about how to engage unengaged students. I read everything. I mean, from John Dewey to Mary McLeod Bethune, all the way up to Jaime Escalante. I mean, I really became a consumer of teaching, learning, and school systems, particularly among kids who are challenged or at risk. And that kind of led me on my journey to where I am now, which each step along the way, I felt I was understanding it better, but I also felt more than anything that the challenges we faced were more of a mindset and the tendency to categorically write kids off prematurely. And that's why this whole idea of building a culture that is completely embracing of every child's potential is really where I landed.
Kevin, with the stories that you've told, I sense a theme here, and that's a purpose-driven life, a purpose-driven career. One of the things that you and I have in common is that we played basketball in a Jesuit high school.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I went to Georgetown Prep. I think you went. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Was it Brebeuf? Brebeuf.
Yes.
So you played high school basketball in a Jesuit, and the experience of going and graduating from a Jesuit high school, Men for Others. I'm kind of hearing that in your story. So you kind of fast forwarded to your law school and your career and your experiences in DC. But tell us about how your formative years and graduating from a Jesuit high school actually informed and developed your purpose-driven mentality.
Yeah, that was a great observation and question, John. And I think it's no question you're right. In fact, my two oldest sons went to Gonzaga in DC, so they had the same.
Next subject, let's move on from that.
Yeah.
We don't like Gonzaga at Georgetown Prep, that's for sure. In fact, I don't let my kids wear purple.
John, Men for Others. Men for Others, all
That's
men.
right, purpose-driven.
We are Men for Others. I digress.
But you're right. I had that natural tendency to want to, I was always the cause guy. And but going to Brebeuf really made a huge difference for me, because this idea of Men for Others was just part and parcel with the whole culture at Jesuit schools. And I did a lot of volunteer work. I mean, I did junior achievement. My father owned a drugstore, as I say, in the hood in Indianapolis. I would deliver prescriptions to senior centers. I mean, I'd have like 50 prescriptions to deliver in a senior building, and, knock on all these doors, and these little old ladies would make me pies and cakes, and some would get all dressed up. And I said to my father, I said, golly, Dad, it's taking me so long because these ladies want to chat. And he said, son, you got to remember, you're a lifeline for a lot of these ladies. So the highlight of their day is you delivering them their medicine. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed like that my high school years, while I was an athlete, I also was surrounded by these images of how a little bit can go a long way to impact people. And so it sort of fed on itself. You're right. I think that the household I grew up, the high school, the Jesuit mindset. And then when I came to DC and got involved in public life, it just sort of took off on steroids, because I had a bigger stage, I guess, and also had bigger urban challenges. And once I locked in on the education conundrum, it was like over, because it's like, that's like an ocean of challenges. But when you ratchet it down, it's the humanity that I think that can, if we keep in touch with each other's humanity and value everyone, going back to those roots, John, I think that's the starting point. We look at sort of the big picture and forget that each one teach one should be the guidepost when it comes to teaching and learning.
John, I want to ask you a question, because, I feel like I've had conversations with you without Kevin in the room, but Kevin sounds like you. So now you're kind of talking to yourself. I feel like at times the experiences and the purpose driven. So we heard Kevin talk for a few minutes. Is there one thing that you could pull out? I mean, he said a lot of things there that were amazing, but is there one thing that you can pull out that you say, you know what, I'm going to use this myself going forward as an entrepreneur in the education space?
Yeah, every Sunday morning, my senior year at Georgetown Prep, I went down into Anacostia for my Christian service project, and worked in the soup kitchens, and can remember at a young age, feeling, man, do I really have to get up? But really having that sense of it's in the DNA of the Jesuits, and it's in the DNA of being men for others, leading a purpose-driven life, trying to put others in front of yourself. And I think that's something that's guided me. This is breaking the grade as we've been broken, as we've gone through our situations, and we've had some failure, and we've had to deal with life. When life gets thrown at you, you can always go back to thinking about how you were raised and putting others first. There's an author that I'm a big fan of, Kevin, you may know him, is Dr. Richard Rohr. He wrote a book called Falling Upwards. Yes. He talks about this, having, thinking about it through, a higher order and doing things that are bigger than you. And that was very informative for me as I've gone through my career and committed to, being a change maker in education.
Okay, Kevin, back to you now. John talks about falling upward. So, and this is breaking the grade, and we believe in breaking for good. So before we get into the professional part of this, in terms of breaking the education space, can you talk about, one of your biggest falls that probably led to one of your biggest breakthroughs?
Well, that's a great question. And you know what I think the best thing that happened to me in terms of my work in education was losing the mayor's race in D.C. in 1998. The teachers union came out against me pretty strong because I supported charter schools. What they didn't say was that I gave them more money than they asked for when we renegotiated their contract. But at the time, it was very controversial at the beginning of the charter school movement. I ran for mayor against Tony Williams and lost, in part, I think, largely because it was a very competitive race, but I lost because of that what I was doing in education. And what was funny, Tony and I laugh about it now, we've become great friends. At one of our first meetings after he was elected, I was pushing for more money for schools, pushing more money for charters, but also DC public schools. And he agreed with me, and I pulled him aside. I said, Tony, I didn't know you were supportive of charters. He said, look, I always was supporting the charters, but you were out in front and they were messing with you. So I was just reaping the benefit of it. So it was kind of funny. But I think that losing that race helped me so much because in a couple ways. One is I actually realized, as crazy as it sounds, I did not want to be mayor. I also realized I did not want to have a career in elected office. It literally solidified my view that I wanted to make a stamp and make my mark in helping to change the way we view not just education, but teaching and learning. And then the second thing it did, it made me, because of that, it made me sort of dig deeper. I was viewed as the charter school guy. In fact, when I get stopped in DC or people call me, they still say, okay, you're the charter school guy. But I started to expand my scope. I work with folks in the World Bank about understanding how teaching and learning takes place in places like Finland and India and in Asia. I met with folks around business schools around the world. I became more of a student of what works as opposed to advocating for one particular approach. I didn't get locked in. And literally that loss helped me expand my horizon and my thinking and become more open about what was possible, recognizing that from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and region, what works in one place may not work in another place because the culture is a little different. So that, I think, losing was a big win for me in terms of my work.
That's great. Well, we're at the halfway mark, give or take, of our show. This is where we would have a sponsored talk. We don't have a sponsor yet, which is perfectly fine. All good. We're going to make it through. So we're going to move to the part of the show, Kevin, where we focus on really the breaking of education for good. And as anybody knows, I like to print articles up. And I read an article that you wrote, The Case for Student First Curricula. This was from 2021. It's still very relevant. And you don't necessarily have to get past the second. You don't have to go past the second paragraph to kind of get knocked off your feet there. This was something that was told to you by a colleague, and I think it's important because we're talking about breaking and rebuilding and things like that. And it said, if we had to rebuild our education system from the ground up, it's the students who would have the best shot at getting it right. We're at a point where we've been broken by this pandemic. We've made it through, and we're getting there. But it's time to rebuild. This was written on September 15, 2021. How do you feel about that quote today?
Well, this is what I feel, Josh, and I'm sure, John, you will understand this. In this when you talk about entrepreneurs, particularly in ed tech, everyone talks about the end user. In education, no one pays attention to the end user, the students. They're the ones who are supposed to benefit from all that we do. We have a lot of education experts, a lot of education theorists who talk about what curriculum should look like, talk about what, school classroom design should look like. But I'm a firm believer in what that first female legendary scientist, Grace Hopper, said, that the most dangerous phrase in the human language is we've always done it this way. And I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks in people freeing their mind and in the way education is delivered. And I'm a big believer in listening to the student voices. For instance, students who are challenged either academically, emotionally, or otherwise, you can't get them to engage by the stand and deliver lecture approach. Josh, you've heard me talk about this, where a teacher stands, lectures, students sit still, don't move, take notes, and give you a test in a couple weeks, and you forget it a week after that. I mean, this idea of problem solving, being collaborative, allowing students to work in groups, allowing students to sort of not rely on a teacher to be the all-knowing, deliverer of content. Students have the content, but helping them understand how to manage the content, be the Obi-Wan Kenobi, the guide for their learning journey. That's the future. Yes, as blasphemous as it sounds, some gamification. Kids grow up on that stuff. And I remember this math teacher at one of our schools, she told me that, this kid reached out to her because she put different levels. When a kid gets to another level, like the game thing, they would get a star or a badge or something. Kid sent her an email 1 a.m. on a Saturday morning saying, I got to the next level. You haven't sent me my badge yet. This idea of us being sort of stuck in the old approach to education service delivery, I just don't think it works. So I remind even teachers that I work with that, some of the things you learn in ed school are great, but my goodness, we have got to have student voices and students' handprints on all of what we do. And I believe in the focus groups. I believe in sitting down with students and hearing from them. I believe in making sure that teachers are continually getting professional development on what it looks like to talk the language of today's students. I think that's part of the future. And I don't believe that we will keep kids engaged, kids that have these challenges at home, have these emotional challenges. We can't reach them by having them sit still and listen to someone for 40 minutes. It just won't work.
Kevin, I want to probe a little bit about DC. You mentioned charter schools. I work at Penn's Graduate School of Education, and we have these conversations a lot about school reform.
Yeah.
Where it's working, where it's not working. And I often say, look at Kevin, look at school reform efforts in DC, and think about that. So here's a school system that has less than 100,000 students. So it's not in New York or not in LA where you've got 1 million students, which in 2022 now has half of the schools nonprofit charters. There is not a lot of, well, there's some, but there's not a lot of this, unions bad, charter schools bad.
Yeah.
There's a lot of conversations that say teachers that work in traditional public schools can be great. Teachers that work in charter schools can be great. Let's work together and put students first. Tell us about maybe even some anecdotes back in the Michelle Rhee days
Yeah.
of how this education reform movement happened, your part in it, and how you feel it's happening now. Because I see it as being a point of light, a center of excellence, something that we can look at that could be replicated in other places in the United States where traditional public schools and charter schools can work together on best practices, putting students first. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree, and thanks for that question. I'm proud to say I think I played a major role in that, and this is how. In places like New Orleans and Chicago, charter schools still face a tortured history because they're viewed as the outside invaders coming in and trying to tell the community how to educate their kids. So it didn't even matter if they had good test results. The culture and the community, the grassroots community, didn't accept them because of the entry points. When we started the charter school movement in DC, I was very intentional about making sure that the community was involved. In fact, I would call people like Marion Barry, say, Kip wants to start a school. Who should we put in this neighborhood? Who should we put on their board? So I would call community leaders. And from the very beginning, it felt organic. And I think that helped ameliorate some of the tension that we see in other places. And by the way, what has made me even more proud is, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this, the competition really mattered. You had, DC principals under Kaya Henderson knocking on doors in the community saying, we can educate your kids too. And DC public schools over the last several years is one of the only major urban school districts that's shown an uptick in student population and growth where others are seeing a decline. And I think that's largely because they've stepped up their game. So I think you're right. And I think the way you do it is you don't, as much as the approach is charter versus traditional versus private seem to be separate, this lift all boats and make sure that you're presenting options that work for parents. And it's not done in a way where the other one is bad, we're good. It's hard to get there, but by having the community involved early on and being intentional about that, I think makes a big difference. And then the other thing is, every now and then, let's share some of these activities. I believe there should be shared athletic competitions. I think there should be shared convocations. I think there should be shared, student jeopardy contests. I mean, all these things that foster a community of learners that even though you go to one school that's supposedly in one system, it doesn't negate the fact that we're all in this together. And the last thing on this is what I've said, I'm amazed when you talk to parents from, lower income working class communities, that they don't often know the difference between charter and traditional public.
Right.
They just know that someone told them that was a good school. And so while we get caught up in the stigma associated with the different modalities, the parents just want a school that works for their kids. And I think understanding that is important.
And we're kind of talking about bad versus good, charter versus public. I want to go, and I know we could do a whole show on this, but I want to touch lightly, if we can, on in-person versus online learning.
Yeah.
And please give us your best long elevator pitch that it is not bad versus good. It is all good. Talk to us about in-person.
Well, during the COVID, Josh, our company's been doing virtual learning for 20 years, and we've learned along the way. And during COVID, it came down to either or, saying, well, virtual doesn't work, it's bad. But keep in mind, there's a difference between emergency remote learning and online learning administered by people who know what they're doing. We've developed over the years efficacy around what an effective teacher looks like in a virtual classroom. We work with Southern New Hampshire University to create the first of its kind master's in virtual education teaching. There's 61 different competencies on what makes a good teacher. But all that aside, I think that this is one of those things that many of today's kids can relate to. And I don't think the future is either or, in person or virtual. I think the future is hybrid, where kids will take some classes in a brick and mortar, they'll take some online, and I think that's the way it should be. I think that many kids can relate to the online experience. And for many school districts, it's a way for them to get kids who are accelerated, get college credit by getting in on some of these online classes. For kids who have challenges, special needs kids, some of the kids that we have, like we do an excellent job with kids who are autistic because they get that one-on-one online and they feel comfortable. They're not in a classroom where there's a lot of other sort of emotional challenges being in the same room with other kids. So it should not be one size fits all. There's room for all of these different approaches in the classroom in this country for kids. And I also think that if we're going to be futuristic in our approach, we shouldn't shut off any valve that works for kids. The one thing I will say, and I know you may want to ask me may have wanted to ask me this question: what advice would I give to educational entrepreneurs, people who want to get in this space? Then I would use one simple yardstick or measuring stick on whether you support something or how you make sure that your idea is resonating. And that is, answer one question: will this help a child or group of children learn? Question mark. If the answer is yes, you should go full force. You shouldn't let the politics, you shouldn't let the status quo, you shouldn't let the way we've always done it, you shouldn't let what the experts say. If it will help a child or group of children learn, you should do it. And I think that should be the guidepost we all use in measuring whether or not we support something that's proposed for kids.
Yeah, I love, Kevin, how you talked about education reform, you talked about DC and your experiences, and you laid out the stakeholders that are required for education reform to be successful. You talked about communities and parents. You talked about students and student agency. You talked about education innovators and what they need to do to put students first. But you said something that I think is really powerful and important. Maybe you can expound on it. And that's teachers.
Yes.
I give a talk on the LeBron Jamesing of teaching. And I say, when we know that teaching, the moment of teachers and teaching has come, is when you're watching something like Sex and the City, the show, and the 3 stars are talking about dating a teacher. Not dating a lawyer, not dating an entertainer, not dating a doctor, but dating a teacher. And I'm hoping that sometime in my lifetime, we have the LeBron Jamesing of teaching where we put teachers first. They're exhausted. They're time-starved. They've been through so much. And now we're throwing the politics at them. We're throwing the politicization of teaching down their throats, which is causing them to be impacted by the Great Resignation. What do you think is the role of teachers and the future of the vocation of teaching, and how important is that in the education reform movement?
Well, you're right, John. I celebrate teachers, and I also think that what we need to do is, first of all, pay teachers more. And I think we need to celebrate them by professionalizing the profession. That was recommended with the Nation at Risk 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I think we need to do that. I also think we need to engage in ongoing, consistent professional development. I think we need to change our approach that has been around for 150 years in terms of our education schools, and the teaching profession should not be viewed as a last stop in terms of career choices, but a first stop. And I think we can incent teachers more by giving them professional development, paying them more, and celebrating their work. One thing that I believe in, that if with these friendly competitions, if a teacher's kids excel, then they should automatically get bonuses. I think that there are so many things we should do along the lines of lifting up teachers and their value, but a lot of it is cultural. And I think that our leaders need to not only talk about it more, put their money where their mouth is, and also find ways to build a national obsession around teaching and learning that's positively infectious, that is aspirational, and is all-encompassing in terms of the teachers and the students that we lift up. So I totally agree with you, and I actually think that that's something that the federal government could set a tone for through its bully pulpit.
Definitely. And I want to say that these aren't just words. You've actually walked this walk. And I appreciate that. In DC, there are things like the Capital Teaching Residency.
That's right.
There's the Education Innovation Fellowship through City Bridge Foundation. So there is this movement of policymakers, innovators, foundation grant makers who came together and said, let's really put our students first. Let's develop, training. Outside of DC, where do you see this happening in a similar fashion? And where can we kind of review other benchmarks for education reform movements that are making a difference?
Well, I'm a big believer in personalized learning, and I always direct people to the Lindsay School District in Lindsay, California. I visit there, spend some time with there. It's not far from Bakersfield. It's a largely migrant workers district, about 15,000 students, and they've become a totally personalized learning district. And by that, I mean that as opposed to the stand and deliver lecture, they believe in student mastery of the subject. They believe in the problem solving. Students have taken ownership of their learning journey, and the teachers are guides. They also, because of the low income nature of the student body, they have upgraded their nutrition for students in terms of their lunch offerings. They have daycare, child daycare for kids in high school who have children. They involve the whole community by using the farmers in the neighborhood, in the county rather, to help get their school digitally wired and help get students access to the internet. And they retrain their teachers and are paying their teachers more. And the one innovative thing they did, which is really crazy, which scares people, they don't offer grades on anything. So a student can't go to the next level or pass a class until they demonstrate mastery. And they have different intervals where they check on whether or not they've achieved that mastery. But without any grading system, they've seen one of the lowest performing school districts in the state, now one of the highest. They've increased their college admissions rates and college going rate for their students. I think that they probably, as much and more than any school district, embody what we should aspire for in school districts. Although like Salem would in Massachusetts, I like some of the stuff they're doing in my hometown in Indianapolis. I think New Orleans has done some great things for charters. They said they had some bumps in the road because they weren't as organically driven in the beginning. But I do think that the new superintendent really is trying to bring it all together. So there are some nice outliers that we can look at. And I have high hopes for the largest school district in the country in New York. My friend David Banks is the new chancellor there. And I think David is going to set a tone that we haven't seen before. I get the sense he's working closely with parents and teachers, and he's grassroots in his orientation. So I'm excited about his leadership in New York.
Yeah, everything that you named there, from the progressive nature of teaching and learning, all the way to the almost Jeffrey Canada kind of cradle to grave approach, where it's a whole child design. It's not just what's happening in the classroom. It's what's happening in the community, what's happening with health and wellness. And now we're seeing a lot of that with mental health acuities and trying to develop the whole child through a mental health lens. I think that's critically important. But naming that, I think, is important. And I have high hopes for what's happening in New York as well. You know, it's one thing to do it in a city that has 100,000 students. There's another in a city that has 1 million. I mean, you talk about sustainability and scalability. My goodness, I want to bring it back to K-12. I wanted to kind of come back to what your vision is for the future of the. By the way, my son was a customer during the pandemic. I like to name him as not just a learner, but a customer of your solution, and got a lot out of it.
Oh, cool.
Where do you think the future is? You mentioned hybrid, but what are some things that are going to come out that are going to impress us about the future of Stride in K-12?
Well, since so many of our kids pre-pandemic, and even is continued some during the pandemic, were academically, emotionally, and economically challenged, we feel that this idea of having an enhanced career learning offering for our students is so important. So that's part of the reason why we changed our name from K-12 to Stride, because we're now about lifelong learning from cradle to the grave. We purchased a couple of adult ed companies who involve in new skilling, reskilling and upskilling adults who want to change their career, like MedSearch, if an adult, wants to change their career and go into, healthcare, radiology, nursing, whatever. Galvanize offers the best STEM boot camp in the country for kids or young people who want to go into STEM post high school. So we feel like having and introducing careers to young people in middle school. So they often kids who are unengaged and they latch on to something, maybe it's agriculture, and they see the connection between using technology to learn when to, plant your crops and harvest your crops, and looking at the screen and seeing how the fields flourish as a result. I mean, that's really cool, engaging stuff. And we have found that inserting some of these career pathways and exposing kids to this at a young age, even if they may not follow that career, it helps keep them engaged. I think the whole future is around, and keep in mind, John, that we're close to 60% of our kids are operating not at grade level. And, many of them are dropping out and not graduating from high school, or graduating and not graduating not at grade level. We feel that the future is how you engage the unengaged. So all the creative ways we can put out there in the virtual hybrid world and we're testing it. We're using it, looking at the data to see what works, to make sure that we keep kids curious about learning. I think that's the future. And I think we work with 1,000 school districts. I've told school districts the same thing. If you do nothing in the virtual space, which I don't recommend, you have to look at what is working to engage the otherwise unengaged. If we can do that, if we can get people hooked on the idea that your learning journey doesn't end with graduation from high school or college, that is part of this lifelong, approach and desire to do better and be better. I think that will be a saving grace for the idea of a cultural learning revolution in the country.
Yeah, it's amazing. At Penn's Graduate School of Education, we put together an innovation index, and we boiled down, what is online or hybrid blended learning look like in terms of the success stories. And if you look at 1,000 ed tech products and 950 of them have failed and 50 of them have been successful, we asked, what made them successful?
Yeah.
And you just named it. First was the engaging nature of the education. If it's not a Fortnite meets Minecraft experience with some gamification, fun, cinematic value, the kids aren't going to lean in and like it. We're just in that day and age. Second was the pedagogical alignment, and knowing a teacher, an administrator has to know that if a student engages in that form of teaching and learning, that there's an actual learning outcome, and you can see it, you can report it. We're still in a world where we have to do well on tests like Smarter Balanced or PARC. And so the pedagogical alignment and knowing that you're developing those 21st century skills, critically important. And most importantly, easy to adopt, the ability to adopt through single sign-on or adopt in a way that doesn't require a lot of training for the teachers. Critically important. So we've kind of put together that index, and I can say that Stride and K-12 is really doing a lot of that very, very well.
Well, and John, if they would only listen to us, right?
If they would only, maybe they need to wear more vests. Winding this down, while I was on this session, President Biden called, and he said, "Kevin, you're talking to him? He's got unlimited resources. I'm going to give him the moonshot for K-12 education." If he gives you that moonshot and say there's no amount of money that is going to be a burden and he can do whatever he wants, what's the one thing that you would do for the education moonshot, say, over the next 5 years?
Well, I would say to the president, let's build this national obsession around teaching and learning. In fact, I would say that you should engage your next opponent and say, we're not going to have a debate about what works in education. We're going to agree that there's no Republican or Democratic way to teach a kid how to read, write, count, or compete. And what we're going to do, we're going to build a national agenda around teaching and learning and build a national obsession that's aspirational, as I said earlier, in tone and content around teaching and learning. And we're going to find common ground to engage kids that are otherwise unengaged. And I think the best way to do that, frankly, Mr. President, is, as you said, John, understand what value add is there to looking at the whole child, what intersection needs to take place between those social services agencies and the educational system that often operate in silos in most cities and states. And by the way, what can we do to make sure our school districts are prepared to embrace technology in the future? Not just virtual learning, but they need to make sure they have secure platforms that are hack-proof. They need to digitize their curriculum so they're not sending out PDFs, when there's a flood or hurricane or, God forbid, a shooting. So this whole idea of, frankly, is tailor-made for this president, of lifting up the discussion above the petty politics of the day, or the politics of I got you, you're right, you're wrong, I'm right. I think that's what's needed more than anything. I think that the individual education policy, approaches or pronouncements are secondary to the mindset associated with a cultural learning environment that is positively uplifting to everyone. And I think a president can do that.
Well, there's your moonshot. Kevin, a man for others, a true education reformer, and a visionary who's doing unbelievable things to actualize that moonshot, right? That's not aspirational. You're actually working on those programs and advancing education and the deeper learning movement. I think we actually, in the name of breaking the grade, broke Josh's internet. So on that sense, we're going to wrap up this show. We can't thank you enough for offering your insight and your guidance and your vision for what's going to advance education as we know it. Thank you so much. We hope to have you back very soon.
John, thank you so much. And thanks to my friend John and the entire staff and crew. Remember, we can do this if we work together. And that should be the message point. All is possible if you believe.
Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Thanks for listening, Breakers.